point, I think Dr. Monareng was talking about cognitive and linguistic rights. Mr. Elijah Mhlanga was talking about adequate proficiency in teaching language. And then we had Vonani Bila, who was talking about colonial aspects to a language and the barbarism of maybe some of our ancestral roots. Let's bring Keabetswe Modimoeng into this conversation very, very quickly. Keabetswe, just from your perspective, and I think it's very, very important, you've been a writer, a poet, a cultural activist, fighting for language recognition. Where are we going wrong or right?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I think we don't incentivize, cultural preservation in the country. It's people often ask themselves, how relevant is this? Why should I continue trying to be the biggest, advocate for Setswana? Do we find Setswana in our technological products? No. Am I examined in Setswana for, higher education? No. So with all these questions hanging, it then poses a question of irrelevance with time. And I think this is, a big setback for us, because when you look at developing countries, those who are advanced in technology and otherwise, they are leaders because they are taught in their own mother tongue. They produce gadgets to us, which, everything end to end is from a language preservation point of view. The Chinese, for an example, and Korea. But the other issue on an entertainment front is the question of using the proper language. So it's one thing also trying to use a local language but bastardizing it than using, the language as, Vonani is doing, with the dictionary and so forth. Using it in its true essence, because that's where the indigenous knowledge is embedded. That's where our whole philosophical makeup is found. And then lastly is the question of locating our languages and confining them only to a grade 12 metric examination. So people will say, your Setswana reminds me of my metric examination. But it has to be part of our everyday life, because that's who we are. And if we don't preserve it, we cannot outsource someone from outside to come and preserve it on our behalf.
Doctor, let me bring you back into this conversation, and I've just for the order, just with all due respect to order, there's a couple of things that Keabetswe mentions that I think is quite telling, and it's one of the things that we talked about, and I think it ties into what you're saying, linguistic rights and cognitive rights. If we're talking about issues of outsourcing, and we're talking about who is supposed to preserve language, and what is the role of government in language, and what is the role of organizations like Pantsel in language, what is the role of activists in there are so many people doing little bits, and yet we're still 20 odd years into our democracy talking about something that many people would have said shouldn't technically be an issue, because part of my language is that I speak Afrikaans, and I speak Afrikaans to my family, and part of your language is something else. So why are we having this conversation at the moment? Why is this big chasm when it comes to understanding language rights and why our kids are not speaking it? And Keabetswe mentioned something else, talking about not bastardizing language. So is it good enough to speak your language, but then it's got to be 100% spoken the right way?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think first let's come up with this line. We just need to be fair to the country and the topic itself. We're out of order now by conducting this interview in English. Basically,
100%.
we're out of order. I think that's where we are supposed to
But would you understand
start.
if I asked you all these questions in Afrikaans?
Yes, I will.
You would? Okay.
Yes, I will.
Obviously, you're the CEO.
Yes. The reason what I'm saying is not about me and you.
Yeah.
It's much deeper than that. It's about the system.
Yeah.
The system that has been inculcated within ourselves during colonialism, where our languages have been taken down to insignificant. There is this concept that is called, was created by, it's called static maintenance syndrome. It is a phrase coined by the late Professor Alexander. That means that my language is a language of a heath, It doesn't take you anywhere. So leave it behind and go on to the language that you think is the language of the world, knowledge, science, and business. That has been inculcated for so many years that the system is controlling ourselves now. That's why I started by saying we're out of order. Because it's difficult for us now to get out of this and be able to converse. You in Afrikaans, me in Sesotho sa Leboa, he in Isindebele, right? Xitsonga. So, and we converse and kind of project what we want to talk about, theory and everything, business and everything in the same language. We can do that.
I want to bring everybody in. I know I'm going. There's been a part of the discussion is that a lot of that business, maths, science, doesn't have the language in other vernacular languages in order to be able to express that. We'll talk about all of those things a little bit later. We're going to take an ad break now. I want to hear from Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, who's from the Department of Basic Education. We're going to bring him into this conversation. We have two guests remotely. One in Polokwane, we've got Vonani Bila, very well respected author, poet, and art movement leader. Another very respected writer, poet, and cultural activist, Keabetswe Modimoeng, who is coming to us from Mahikeng. We're part of this conversation. We're going to unfortunately have to pick up this conversation again at 8:10. I'll ask everybody to be very short in their responses, and hopefully we can get through a lot more issues at 8:10. We take an ad break. Don't go anywhere.